I'm talking to State Senator Bruce Tarr, as I do every week. And Bruce, this is our last conversation before the holiday break, so we send you warm wishes.
Warm wishes to you and everyone at 1623. And Heather, I have to say, what a wonderful background you have. I can see the snow out the window from the snowstorm. I see the Christmas tree. You know how wonderful it is to see that spirit in your background.
Right, and it's real.
It's wonderful, and I have enjoyed all of our broadcasts over the past year, and I look forward to more in the new year.
Sure. So let's start with the biggest gift of all, I think, the vaccine that has arrived in Massachusetts.
So it's really good news that the Pfizer vaccine has arrived. It's being distributed according to a plan that was put together by the Baker administration that was approved by the federal government. There are 3 tiers, and those tiers are prioritized according to health risk. So for instance, some of the first people to get the vaccine, as we've been seeing in the news, are people that deal with COVID-19 in the form of healthcare. They're either in a hospital or they're a first responder, or they have some other reason where they're facing the prospect of exposure. And those tiers will move on, again, according to risk as time goes by, and hopefully it'll get deployed as quickly as possible. It's also significant that the Moderna vaccine is coming very quickly on the heels of the Pfizer vaccine in terms of getting approved. And one of the advantages of the Moderna vaccine is it does not require the same kind of extreme refrigeration as the Pfizer vaccine does. So in theory, that will make it easier to distribute. So there's a lot of positive things happening. There are a lot of positive things happening with regard to the vaccine, but also things that are a little bit concerning, more than a little bit concerning. And that is, obviously, we want to get the vaccine as quickly as possible. We want to get it out to people as quickly as possible. And, we are in a situation of trying to work with the federal government to be able to do that. And again, there are some things that are concerning about that relationship.
And most recently in the news, it has been announced that the shipment being delivered to Massachusetts and to some other states is less than they had thought. Can you
That's
clarify?
one issue that's very concerning. The other thing is, and I haven't actually read this, but I'm told there was a statement by Pfizer yesterday that they've got a large quantity of vaccine in a warehouse or several warehouses and haven't been directed to distribute it by the federal government, or at least haven't been given guidance on where it should go. At a time when we need to get this vaccine out as quickly as possible, that is a huge problem. And I know that our governor and his administration will be working on this. I will be advocating for them to reach out directly to the federal government and say, we need that vaccine here. And if it's not going anywhere else, we need it here as quickly as possible.
Mm. And the governor, in his statement today, he did mention that they are looking for qualified people who can administer the vaccine.
So there is an outreach to try to find folks that have the qualifications. I mean, obviously, it's important to get the vaccine out quickly, but it's equally important to get it out safely. And so there's been a lot of partnerships so far with places like CVS and Walgreens. And what the governor is suggesting today is we also need to look beyond that to see if there are folks that may be available that are qualified, that are willing to step up and help. And that is a huge recruiting effort. It's an important recruiting effort. And I'm hoping it's going to yield some benefits. Throughout the pandemic, there have been similar requests, and folks have really risen to the occasion for other needs. Now we need folks who I guess technically are called vaccinators, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to get some more through the governor's request.
Mm. So the governor just filed a bill putting a freeze on unemployment insurance rates for employers and issuing a bond to pay the federal government back for the money it receives for unemployment insurance.
This is incredibly important, Heather, and I don't think up until now the idea has gotten enough attention. And so just to go back a little bit, the unemployment insurance program is paid for from a trust fund. And that trust fund assesses employers for contributions. And the level of those contributions is based on their so-called experience rating, whether there's large turnover and whether their employees or former employees have turned often to the system to be able to collect benefits. Well, obviously, in the period of COVID-19, there have been a lot of folks that have needed to turn to unemployment insurance. In fact, my office has been working very diligently with hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have asked for help being able to get unemployment insurance that had never needed to look for it before. So if we did nothing, that experience rating and the assessment that would be needed to keep the fund balance stable would cause an increase of literally hundreds of dollars per employee that employers would have to pay at a time when they can least afford to pay it. So what the governor has done is put together a system where we wouldn't be borrowing from the federal government. That is usually the way that we fill a gap in the unemployment insurance trust fund. And that borrowing comes with a significant rate of interest. So what the governor and his team, and particularly Secretary Mike Heffernan, the Secretary of Administration and Finance, have done is explored alternatives. And the alternative that they put on the table officially today would be for the state to float a bond, take advantage of a low borrowing rate, offer the benefit of that low borrowing rate to businesses that are going to have to pay the increased cost of having so many people drawing unemployment insurance, and be able to freeze the rate, or at the very least limit the rate of increase, so that the survival of the businesses is enhanced, so that they're not carrying an additional burden beyond all the others that they're currently facing.
Is it a stopgap measure, or is it a measure that really can extend down the line?
Well, it certainly has potential for the long term, but the thought right now is to get it in place for the immediate term to be able to stave off a crisis where employers suddenly get these very large bills that they won't be able to afford. Now, in the future, we can continue to look at this, but at the moment, it's being contemplated for the existing circumstance.
So this bill has just been filed, and what hope do we have of seeing it come to being finalized?
I think it's got a better than even prospect of passing. The question is timing. So our formal legislative session ends on the last Tuesday, or the first Tuesday, rather, I'm sorry, the first Tuesday in January. And so if this were going to pass, we'd have to get it done by then. Obviously, it has to go back and forth between the House and the Senate, and it would need to have a public hearing in some form. A lot of times these days, public hearings are done by doing a Zoom or a Teams or some other form of electronic communication, or taking written testimony. Either way, it's still important that it happens. So there are a lot of mechanical things here that have to happen. And it is important to allow people to have a voice in the legislative process too, which isn't mechanical, it's very substantive. So all of the pieces have to fit tightly together on this time frame. But even if we don't get it done by the end of the legislative session, the good news is the new legislative session starts on the first Wednesday of the month. And so we'll be able to take it up hopefully quickly.
And moving on, how about the budget? Where do we stand with the 2021 budget at this point?
So good news there too. The governor signed the budget into law, but as governors always do, he vetoed some items. He vetoed about $167 million worth of spending, which in a budget of between 46 and $47 billion isn't that large. You know, when we hear the dollar value of it, we think it's a huge amount, but in the scheme of things, it's not as big as we often see. And also there are about 113 outside sections in the budget, and the governor vetoed or sent back with amendments 17 of them. So he really used a light touch with regard to affecting the budget that was sent to him. And as we've talked about, I'm very pleased that the ignition interlock legislation that I had placed into the budget did get signed into law. He didn't veto it, he didn't amend it. It will be law in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So that was good news. But what the legislature now has to do is contend with all of those vetoes or pieces that were sent back with amendment. And as I just mentioned, we have a very short period of time to do that, particularly when you take into account the 10 days that the governor has to take action on something after we've sent it to him. So if we reject something that he sent back with amendment, he still has another 10 days. And of course, the legislature always wants to preserve its power and do something that allows that 10 days to expire so that it can still come back to be overridden. So there are a lot of moving pieces. But one thing I wouldn't want folks to lose sight of, Number one, Chapter 70 school funding is level funded, and there's even an adjustment for inflation and enrollment that the governor signed after we had sent it to him. And to be fair, he had proposed that in his budget revision. The second thing is local aid is level funded. That's something that many of us were worried we weren't going to be able to do, but that we wanted to do. It is done. And so level funding there. And all of our health and human service programs have not been reduced as to eligibility. So we know this is a really tough time, and folks will still be able to turn to those resources. And so, for instance, there's about $30 million of money in the budget for emergency food programs, and we know how important that is. We see the wonderful work that's done by the Open Door and its cohort around the state. Also money for rental arrearages to help keep people in their homes. There's about $50 million of that, and about $56 million for homeless programs, shelters and the like. So in many ways, this is a very, very difficult year, but a positive budget in terms of our ability to respond. And planning for the budget, the next year's budget, fiscal year 2022, is actually already underway. And that could be an even worse year in terms of meeting our gap than this year. But I remain optimistic, and hopefully we'll find a way through. And I'm encouraged by word coming from Washington that there may be a stimulus package coming soon that would provide us with some additional resources.
Yes. So do you want to comment on that package? What we're hearing is that there will not be state and local aid, right?
Well, and that would be a serious mistake. There are a lot of things that should be in this package. Number one, I would have hoped that it would have been passed a lot earlier than now, so that we could have incorporated into our budgeting. We delayed the budget process, as we talked about a while ago, to see if we might get something from the federal government. But the states really do need assistance. And I would hope that if not in this package, in a subsequent package, we would see some assistance, from the federal government. That being said, there's a lot of need. And I know there's talk about additional stimulus checks, additional unemployment insurance. We are talking to folks every day in our office that need those things. And so I'm hoping that they will get approved as soon as possible. And if we have to wait to get money for the states and municipalities, then my hope would be as soon as possible that discussion can restart so that we can balance the budget and pay for a lot of the important things, like the ones I just described, that are important for folks, again, as we all try to navigate the pandemic.
If this package is minus the state and local aid, where are we going to see that the most obviously?
Well, for the remainder of this fiscal year, we're covered. We did a draw from the stabilization fund that leaves around $2 billion left in the fund. And so we were able to make ends meet. This budget is sustainable. The governor made some reductions, again, modest reductions to keep spending in line. We would most likely see this problem surface in fiscal year 2022, which would be beginning next July. But in order to do prudent budgeting, we really need to know if funds are coming or not. And that's before we get to the issue of extraordinary expenses. We just saw what's happening, for instance, with the MBTA and a dramatic reduction in service. If we were to get some assistance from the federal government, some of those service cuts could be restored. If we were to get assistance from the federal government, we might be able to increase our food programs and assistance and our housing programs and so many other things. So we've done the best we could with the resources we have to be able to meet spending priorities, keep the budget balanced, and not increase the tax burden on people who can ill afford to pay increased taxes. But that being said, it is important to have the partnership of the federal government, and now is a critical time. And so my hope would be not only for fiscal year 2022, but for right now, for the very real needs that we have, we would see some additional resources.
We have some good local news, right, Bruce?
We do. Communities are all working to try to find ways to help their local businesses because it is a difficult time. And one of the things that came to us by way of the Gloucester City Council and Mayor Romeo Taken was a piece of home rule legislation. And that was spearheaded by a number of counselors, including Barry Pett and Melissa Cox and others. And the idea behind this is restaurants that have seasonal liquor licenses will soon be prohibited by the requirements of their licenses, prohibited from continuing to sell alcohol. But we all know that alcohol generates a strong amount of revenue for restaurants. And so what the city council and the mayor are asking us to do is allow them to allow those liquor licenses to continue in operation through the winter and into the spring, when they would normally become operative again to allow the sale of alcohol. And it's something that may seem small, but right now everything counts. And so this is a bill that was sent to us, filed by Representative Ferranti and me. It passed the Senate today. It's now going over to the House, and she and I have been in communication today. And I know that she's going to roll up her sleeves and work diligently to get it moved through the House. Still has a couple of steps to go between the branches, but it is a great example of something that is somewhat simple in many ways, but powerful if you have a restaurant that needs that extra revenue. And so I see it as a great example, and I think it may even be something that ultimately we adopt as a statewide policy. But at least for right now, the Gloucester City Council and Mayor Taken are leading the way to get something done.
So we wish you and all your family a very happy holiday, and may it be peaceful and healthy and safe. And I understand this is the last few hours of your quarantine, so congratulations on that too.
I will be set free at midnight tonight, Heather. But thank you so much. And the very best of holiday wishes for you and your family, and for all of our viewers on 1623. Again, this local community cable TV station is a gift every day. And what you provide us with is something that we should never take for granted.
We will see you in 2021.
We'll see you then.